Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Derceto Files, aka the Ash Files, hosted by me, Ash Millman, joined by my horror experts, Elizabeth Bishop.
Hi.
And Josh Brown.
Hello.
Now, I've collected these creepy fellows from across the corners of the internet to talk all about Alone in the Dark, which we have played and loved and want to dive into to look at all the different parts that make up its horror. So, this is going to be a 3-part podcast series, with today looking at the legacy of Alone in the Dark, kind of its history, its roots in survival horror, and how it's shaped it over the years as well. So, what you can expect in this episode, gang, just to let you guys know as well, we're going to have our thoughts on the game as new and returning players. We're then going to look at Alone in the Dark's relationship with survival horror, and fun for both of you, there's going to be a quiz.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Yay! Thanks, Ash. Quizmaster Ash.
Yeah. The real horror is making you two answer questions that I pulled from the ether. So.
You're sat on your throne. You're looking a bit like a teacher, and I feel like a student over here who's about to get an F in his homework.
Yeah. I'm feeling very tall and powerful as well. Like, I've put you guys on a lower seat just so I can look down on you. Be like, tell me the trivia that I've got.
How rude.
Yeah. Wow. We'll get to that later. First, we're going to dive into the legacy of Alone in the Dark. So, let's do it. All right, I feel like the natural starting point for talking about Alone in the Dark is asking you guys what you think of when I say Alone in the Dark to you. Before this 2024 release, reboot, reimagining came out, what did that name conjure in your horror minds?
For me, at the very least, it conjured being about 11 years old, leaving the bathroom, turning the light off and having to do a mad run to my bedroom because I was so scared of being alone in the dark. But in terms of the game, it reminds me of the grandfather of survival horror, right? Like the sort of progenitor of a bunch of iconic horror franchises that would arrive later in the 90s and into the 2000s, you know? The idea of being locked in a haunted house and having to just figure your way out of some nightmare.
Yes.
Yes.
How about you, Liz?
So my insight isn't quite as spectacular as that was. I'm the newbie to it, so I had sort of vaguely heard of the game, but didn't really know sort of what it was about. I very much am into horror gaming. I'm a newbie to horror gaming. I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any means, but over the last sort of couple of years, I've sort of worked my way through all the big titles and things. So I know that the legacy of this has sort of inspired a lot of later games. So I was excited to sort of go back and see where all the inspiration came from.
Yeah. Was it quite fun diving into it as kind of a new player in a new release then as well?
Yeah, definitely. It was really fun going into it, sort of having absolutely no idea what to expect. It was different to what I expected in a good way. I could see where all the sort of references were in later on games, but it wasn't complete. It didn't feel like it was something that a bunch of people had just straight up copied. It still felt very unique and like its own thing. So yeah.
I think it's a strange franchise in a good way, and this is going to sound really strange, but it kind of reminds me of watching The Simpsons a little bit. You know when you watch The Simpsons and it's so packed full of kind of references, and then you kind of end up watching the thing that references from, and you go, oh, that's where that's from.
Yeah.
I kind of had that experience with Alone in the Dark because I got to it way after the fact when I'd already played games like you, Liz, through Silent Hill and Resident Evil and everything that this kind of partly inspired. So then to go back to the original games and then play this new reimagining, it really sort of made me appreciate, and I had so many light bulb moments where I was going, I can trace that back now. This is where that came from, or this is where that bit of inspiration kind of butterfly affected out into these other elements of pop culture.
For sure. I feel like I came to Alone in the Dark quite late. Like, I didn't play the original 90s releases. I came to it with the 2008 remake, and that's very different to everything else and very like car focused. I loved driving around the city as like buildings were going. I was like, I'm alone in the dark. Like I really loved that game, and that's what I grew up on. Very noughties kind of stylized horror. and watching the film as well was my 2 intro points to Alone in the Dark. So going into this game and then also returning to the 90s game to get my taste of that as well was a very refreshing kind of take on it, because it was completely different to everything that I'd associated with Alone in the Dark originally. So, but the idea of it had always stood as grandfather of 3D survival horror. I do think grandfather is the name for it as well. That's it with its walking stick. And it's like campy, spooky atmosphere. And also the artwork, I always remember thinking, man, the artwork's really cool.
Yeah.
Because like you see that loading screen, or when you load it up, and like that's made the rounds, and it's just so good.
I mean, as a owner of a ginger mustache, I think it did a lot for ginger mustache as well, and ginger facial hair.
Yeah.
But just the art style of that original, yeah, I think for me growing up, I kind of naively dismissed it a little bit as being too colourful, too kind of low res. But like, I go back to it now, and like you say, it's so striking, even though it was, you know, partly due to the technical limitations at the time, but it was a technical breakthrough at the same time.
Yeah.
And you get these just kind of surreal and not quite cartoonish, but certainly colourful styles of horror that, you know, were moved away from as graphics became more, I don't want to say the PS1 era got more real, but it certainly tried to evoke reality a little bit more, whereas the original especially, and I guess the first and second sequel, kind of existed in this extremely strange, colourful, stylized space.
Yeah, when everything was like 2 polygons wide as well. It's like, oh, it's really interesting to see how they've taken those ideas and then put them into the 2024 release as well, and seen all of that kind of genealogy that made up Alone in the Dark and its name and what people think about it, and then turned it on its head with this nasty little Bayou. Bayou? Is that how you say Bayou?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think.
Bayou?
I mispronounce
Bayou.
everything, so
Yeah.
I'm going to just have to assume you're
I'm going to
spot
say
on.
swamp.
Yeah.
So,
Same thing.
yeah. I also want to ask you what threads now, so kind of an opportunity to talk about later survival horror and maybe films as well and different parts of media. What threads can you see from Alone in the Dark throughout the survival horror genre, and what do you think those influences have kind of been? Because for me, like, first of all, we're set in a mansion. Straight away, you can see how that is a 1-1 follow-up with stuff like Clock Tower and Resident Evil. Like, those initial inceptions of big survival horror that everybody's played, everybody knows about. They've got a spooky house. And it feels like Alone in the Dark was the first horror game to kind of really cash in on that, from my opinion.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, for me, in terms of game design, so much of the threat and intensity of survival horror as a genre kind of comes from your lack of mastery over a space. My favorite entries in the genre are ones that give you something akin to a single location that might spread out in a bunch of different areas, but you're kind of trapped in a place, right? Like you are in the original Alone in the Dark or Resident Evil, you're trapped in this mansion. And what I love about that original, and what I think it helped pioneer, is that idea that you can never quite master a space in these games. As something as simple as a house is always going to remain unpredictable, whether that's going up to the attic and having a monster smash through the window that you're unprepared for, or a trap on the floor, or you walk in and there's an eldritch abomination there. Every time you think you get your bearings in one of these games, and especially the new reimagining, the developers have something that kind of pulls the rug under you, and you kind of feel like, well, this seems like it should just be a hallway that I've walked down multiple times and am the king of, because I've got a big sword and a big gun. But oh no, there's a surprise waiting for me.
There's a pirate now.
Yeah, there's a pirate there. And it's got those surprises. I think, just generally like the haunted house setting. But for me, it's the way you navigate it through the locked doors and through being kind of denied the obvious route almost, because it's so familiar, but it's so unfamiliar at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I know if you've been playing a lot of the horror games and the big releases recently, how do you feel like Alone in the Dark has tied into those?
Yeah, definitely. My first thought when it sort of opened up and, you know, you're in the sort of swampy marshlands and stuff, my brain went straight to Resident Evil Biohazard.
Yes.
And the sort of opening of that, driving up to the big mansion and like discovering, you know, walking around that big house and finding things. But for me, it's like going back to what you said about like, you know, being stuck in the one location and things sort of changing, it gave me a little bit of PT vibes, like where you just stuck on a loop, sort of going around the same location, but every time you open another door or, you know, walk down a different corridor, it suddenly changes. And I really, really loved that. The only other game that I thought of that it really sort of took me back to, and this is, I don't know if this is one that many people will have heard of, or maybe they will in the gaming community and I'm just too new to it, but there was a Welsh game called Maid of Sker, I think, about like a guy that goes to this old hotel and, you know, he's sort of wandering around looking for this woman. And I like that you've got the mystery. I love any sort of mystery within a horror game. Like, there's a part of me that obviously just loves combat and wants to run around shooting zombies and stuff. But for me, it's sort of uncovering that mystery, like what happened here, like why am I in this particular place? You know, what am I looking for? And Maid of Sker had that similar sort of thing where you were going around finding letters and finding clues, and sort of also had that weird mix of, you know, someone dealing with mental health versus supernatural monsters and things like that. So yeah, I can definitely see its influences.
For sure. I feel like the Scare Games is a really great shout, actually, because it's one that, like, I hadn't considered until you said it. I was like, oh my God, yeah, there's so Made of Scare, like, coded.
Yeah.
No, honestly, I think that's an incredible point, because I was here thinking about like the older, maybe more classic titles like a Resident Evil, which we've mentioned so many times. But you think about the games that are coming out now, whether they're the big mainstream releases or the India titles. You've got Made of Scare, you've got stuff like Visage, you've got stuff like Madison, in all of these titles where you're trapped in a seemingly mundane house that begins to change, it begins to morph, and it kind of begins to become a representation of, like you said, Liz, like your character's mental issues or their past traumas or something like that. And I love that idea that is in the original Alone in the Dark, but is especially in Alone in the Dark 2024, of the house and the location and the environment being this manifestation, this physical manifestation of the character's own internal turmoil and past, and it literally has an effect on the space around you.
Yeah, I think definitely the new game does that incredibly well, and I do want to get onto that in our next section that focuses a bit more on the 2024 title, because there's loads there to uncover. But I think it's also worth referencing that I do really feel like Alone in the Dark was this kind of germination seed for the walking sim, which is your Madisons, your, the Silent Hill games, your PTs, all of that sort of thing, Visage. I think that it's a really nice little starting point for, you know, going around a house, doing it very slowly, because when you're walking as Mr. Edward Carnby going, oh, doo-doo, and you can run. But when I was playing it, going, hee, like now, looking back at it, at just how much they build the atmosphere and tension by just making you go dead slow if you're not like legging it around the place. And I definitely can see that reference and how it's bloomed and blossomed from there into other things. Whereas I feel like that's one of the germination points, as I say, and then PT was the blooming of it, and then loads of offshoots have come from that since.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that the writer of this game was also a writer on Soma and Amnesia: The Dark Descent, both of which themselves seem heavily inspired by the original Alone in the Dark. Amnesia, especially with its more kind of regal setting and Lovecraftian influences. And I like to see how that was. It wasn't a walking simulator, but it was more akin to a walking simulator than an action game. You know, there's not much action in it. You don't have any offensive capabilities, really. And then to see that, like you said, that sort of germination eventually come back around to Alone in the Dark as a franchise. And it's like, oh, okay, we're back. We've blended all of these influences, and we're having a good time doing it.
Oh, love it. Just love horror. Horror's great.
It's nice, isn't it?
I've been scared.
You sounded very Black Country then. I loved it. I've
said so many times in the run up to this podcast that this is regional accents, the podcast. Oh man. But I also think what you mentioned with letters kind of doing the world building and finding things and puzzles being the centerpiece of Alone in the Dark, that's just staple. That's just the basic parts of survival horror now. And like whether that was established there or if it's, you know, just been reinforced through so many years of games following that formula is a really interesting thought to have, because then we wouldn't have stuff like thinking about Dredge and Signalis with their very small inventories, for example.
Yeah.
And they aren't even necessarily survival horror games in the same way. They're very different, but they've taken all the different parts that come from an established genre and made it into their own. Just good stuff. My next question is, how do you think Alone in the Dark 2024 keeps the spirit of the original game in its blood? And the first thing I want to point out before I even let either of you answer is the frog.
The frog!
The frog!
I popped silly for the frog. I went crazy for that little guy.
Because I played the first one and then went back to the old ones. I played the first one and was like, why have they opened with this frog getting eaten by a crocodile? And then played the old one. I was like, it's the frog! He's here!
I did something similar where I played through one character in the remake, then I went back to the original, and then I played the second character. So the second time when I watched it and the frog jumped out, I was like, wow, this guy is iconic.
He's lived years.
Get him on the cover. He's seen some stuff, right? He's been through a lot. For me, though, again, is someone who's dabbled in some of the previous games here and there, I was impressed with how much of a love-in the new game is, especially with the first 3 Alone in the Dark games from what I can pass. You know, the different endings of this title sometimes reference the events from the sequels. There's a great ending, kind of like a secret ending, where it's revealed that Carnby and Emily parents and Grace is their child, and they're coming out of a Alone in the Dark play. And they reference, you know, how convoluted the story was and how strange it was that there were pirates involved. And they mention Hell's Kitchen at one point, which is, I think, the setting of the second or third game. So to have all of those little threads that even someone who isn't necessarily, you know, living and breathing in this world can kind of appreciate. I thought that was like a really cool touch to acknowledge stuff that would have been really probably difficult to modernize or, you know, adapt in a one-to-one way, but still keep the spirit of those ideas alive in a certain way. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely like a ghoul haunting the bones of this game from the original. Like, I think just that vibe of when you see the character that you choose in the original game walking up the driveway and there's a ghoul's hands on the window and they're looking out at them coming in on their own. I feel like that is the whole vibe of the new game. It's like something's bigger's going on, something's watching you, something's there that you can't quite put your finger on, and there's all these different paths that it could take and does take as the story unfolds. But yeah, I think even like stuff from the element of surprise and not knowing where the scares are going to come from. Did you find that with the new one as well?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that you say that Grace is sort of maybe has a different arc or a different sort of vibe in the other games, because for me, she was the character that I was the most interested in. I really feel like there was something that I don't know about Grace, and I feel like I want to sort of replay it and relive it to see what did I quite miss? Because I don't know. I just feel like she's a bigger character than
Josh is going.
Oh, she is.
Yeah, I feel like I have
untrustworthy little swine. That Grace.
Yeah, she's like. I mean, I played the prologue as well, like just to try and get the full effect, and it follows Grace, and I just remember thinking like, you know more than you're letting on. You're very nonchalant about all these like creepy Jumanji looking rooms in your house and stuff. So yeah, I maybe I need to go back and replay all the original ones because I really need to know.
I don't know if that. I feel like there's just so many different threads and so many different references. But like Grace tells you parts of the story as well. Like she leaves you notes. She tells you where to look. Like she knows. She leaves very knowing things around that is kind of like your guide through the story. So it's very funny that she is maybe part of this ending as well.
Honestly, one of the scariest characters for me. Just that.
100%.
I think it's almost hard to do a scary kid these days because the convention is a little bit maybe overdone, or we've seen it a lot, but there's something about Grace and like the kind of the coldness and like the lack of something behind the eyes in a way that it really unnerved me. And then she's leaving those weird old drawings around it. I think I don't want to mess around with those. Those look like perhaps an entrance to a eldritch nether realm of pure terror.
I feel like she's just such a great little character to keep throwing back to, and that in the canon ending she is so tied to I say the canon ending, in one of the main endings that you get, she is the one that is a sacrifice. She's the one that's part of a cult offering, and she's very knowledgeable about this. She's even excited. She like runs up and puts the noose on. It's like, yippee, time to get sacrificed. I was like, Grace, what are you doing? So it's very interesting how she's kind of this mysterious, unknowable character, and I think that kind of leans into the cosmic horror of it and the Lovecraftian element as well, because she is unknowable in herself. Like, you don't know what's going on in there, if she's maybe a facet of some outer god or something as well, since we've got all of these other powerful forces coming into play.
Yeah, it's like, is it a child or is it not a child?
Yeah.
That's what I say about Grace, because I just don't know if she's some kind of monster, because like you said, she, you know, plays into the ending with the sacrifice, which is so traumatizing in a way because of how gleeful she is during that moment. But then she's also heavily tied to Carnby's backstory as well, with his time as a private detective and the trauma that she's been through there. And there's that great line where she's on the bridge and she kind of implies that she might have been in the water as well and maybe drowned, and it's kind of like, what's real, what isn't real, is she there, isn't she there? And I like that there's that sort of level of mystery and ambiguity to even side characters in the game who aren't, you know, scaly abominations.
Yeah, I think if I was watching this story play out as a horror film, I would be waiting for like the big reveal to be that actually they're all dead. Or, you know, they're all ghosts, or they're all secretly like creatures and things. I'm really glad that is sort of more of a theory across all the games, and it's not just this one that I sort of imagine things. So I think as a horror fan, you're always looking for something that's potentially sometimes not there.
Yeah.
But with Grace, I felt it all the way through. I was almost expecting her in particular to turn out to be the big bad at the end.
Well, you mentioned earlier, Ash, about like mystery being such a core of the franchise, and there are so many red herrings and misdirections in this game, not just about what's real and what isn't, but, you know, who the actual villain of the piece is, what are they tied to, like what are the orderlies and the other patients in the hospital up to, like is Jeremy's Darkman actually real or not? Like that constant guessing game of who is the real threat in this big, luscious mansion, I think, was at the core of the original and at the core of this one as well.
Yeah, and there's so many different threads all the time. Like, is it the pirates? Is it the, like, you know, that they've turned into this artist colony? Is it the people before? Are they all working for the same thing, which is kind of what the implication is? But it's all over these years, and how do they know about it? And how do they connect? And there's also this strange Egyptian pharaoh that's doing shows and getting into Jeremy's brain. What's his deal? Like, it's just, I think it's kind of emblematic of horror being around every corner and so many different forces having their claws in Derceto and pulling it in all these directions, because there isn't one big bad, there isn't one terrible thing. It is unknowable because not even the people in the game know what's going on, as there's so many different things at play, because even the people doing the cult business are like, oh yeah, the dark man, whatever, don't worry about it. Like,
don't worry about him, he's probably all right, you know.
And then you fall into someone's brain, you're fighting Jacob, who's like, oh yeah, prisoner of ice business going on, okay.
Well, the rot. I love the rot as a motif throughout the game. And
very Resi 7 as well.
Yes.
Very Resi 7. And you find, or even like, you know, if we're going to movies, something like, is it Relic, where you have this similar idea of the house being covered in the mold. But I loved one little file you can read in Alone in the Dark that implies that the rot has this almost scientific basis in that it's giving off some kind of chemical that is impacting everyone's brain chemistry and turning them mad. So I like that even with that, there's a level of ambiguity, because you might be physically fighting a giant tree god, but what if it's just, you know, thanks to some kind of chemical imbalance from this horrible rot that's taken over this really old house? Like, there's that doubt that's put in your mind as to what you're seeing and whether or not it is real, or whether or not, you know, it is just this shared madness by this seemingly weird, mundane bit of, I don't know, house maintenance gone wrong.
I think there's something to be said for the things you read in Alone in the Dark. In the original one, there's some that just damage you and kill you straight away. So can you even trust them in this new one? Like, is that kind of an insanity bender all over again? Like, are they pointing to things that make sense? Are they pointing to things that don't make sense? Like, what's true and what isn't? I don't know.
That unreliable narrator is it keeps you guessing. Like even Dr. Gray, and I know it's a classic horror convention in a good way, that it's, the people who are running the asylums are mad themselves, but you get the reveal that Dr. Gray is just as entrenched in the Lovecraftian mythos and the supernatural as anyone else. So even when you're going through the game, especially in your first time, you're kind of reading his notes. I took him as something of an authority, even though I didn't fully trust him, completely. And then when you realize, he's just part of this cult, I think it makes you reframe what you've been told before and what you've been reading, because you're checking these official documents. But how much of that has been fabricated? How much of that is down to this shared madness? Or how much of it is true? And trying to pass that is... It's so cool in building a world, I think.
The Doctor has been doctoring things, eh?
Hey.
I really want to talk about the fixed camera throwback you get in one of the chapters as well. Liz, how did you feel about that, if you were coming to it kind of fresh?
I think if I didn't know that it was a throwback, I think if I went into the game and I genuinely just thought this is a brand new game and this is something that they've put in, I probably would have been like, why? Like, it's so hard to control, and I kept walking backwards and every time, trying to like get in between the rooms and stuff, and I kept bumping into walls. But being a throwback, I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was really cute. I think it was well done. It didn't suddenly look like low graphics or anything. It still looked like high quality and stuff. But yeah, I'm so glad that we don't have to play the whole game like that. I think we're in a golden age of gaming where we don't have to use controls.
Sacrilege! Look, I don't like a tank control, as in I find them a little bit difficult, but I feel like once you get used to them, you're like, it's just like beloved clunk. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to have to like do a good turn here to get all the way around, do a little backup, do a side step. And the fixed camera angles as well. It's just like, I've been replaying the first Silent Hill and going back and seeing those gorgeous angles where it kind of shifts and moves, and then it snaps around to another corridor, not being able to see what's coming. It's just the trophy being get what you want. I was like, this is what I want. This is what I want. I do like this.
It does kind of feel like, when you think of like horror references and stuff, though, I do wonder if like found footage to a degree might have been inspired by like games like that. Because if you think about it, how many times have you watched like a horror film where, you're watching security footage from like a camera in the corner, or things like Grave Encounters where they're like filming a mockumentary and they, set up cameras and all you see is that angle of someone like walking into a room or walking down a corridor and then something spooky happens. Yeah. That was kind of my thoughts when I was watching it. I was like imagining that I was in a found footage movie and my characters were like...
You Five Nights at Freddying it, pressing all the CCTV buttons. Oh my God, maybe Alone in the Dark is actually the Five Nights at Freddy's progenitor. That's where it all comes from. Yeah.
Call me a sick freak, but I like
You're a sick freak.
Thank you, yeah. Do it again. Call me a sick I love the tank controls unashamedly. It's kind of my comfort genre, I suppose, or subgenre of horror. There's something I like about the methodicalness of it. Like, you're controlling a person, but again, just like you don't have mastery over the space, you don't even have mastery over someone's limbs, really. You're going to turn them like
just like real life.
Just like real life, 100%. And I was playing through Alone in the Dark, the new Nightmare, before going into the remake, and that game kind of made me realize just how much I love that style of what you both were talking about there. Not just the tank controls themselves, which I understand can be quite finicky, but the fixed camera angles, 100%. They just do so much to capture a very specific vibe and a curated vibe. I think part of what makes horror scary and what games often struggle with at times is that you have too much control, whereas if you have fixed camera angles, you're only seeing literally what the developers want you to see, and that just can be used in so many different ways to get a scare out of you, get a little bit of a jolt out of you, and also just make for some lush bits of cinematography. I think what Alone in the Dark 1992 started that has been kind of re-embraced by horror games now. I'm thinking of something like Alone in the Dark, or even some titles by Puppet Combo, is having fixed camera angles, which are maybe a throwback, but incorporating new technology that allows you to move through them in a different way. I love it when you have kind of a fixed camera angle and then the camera purposefully starts to move with your character, and you just kind of get the feeling of almost like a dimension being broken in a way. And that's what I think happens with Alone in the Dark's the new Alone in the Dark, where you enter that room and the dimension is broken for a second. You don't have control of your character. You're kind of having an out-of-body experience in that way. So it's not only, a throwback to the original game, but it works in the moment as you're going into the final stretch of the title to signify, all right, things are getting weird.
Yeah.
You can't even trust the perspective of your character to stay the same.
100%. I think that's a great point. And I'm also really glad you brought up Puppet Combo, because I feel like this is just kind of a throwaway comment, but in Stay Out of the House, when you die, you get the butcher grabs your feet and takes you down to the killing zone. And it's like a direct one-to-one with I keep saying one-to-one. It's one-to-one. It's one-to-one with the Alone in the Dark 1992, when you die in that and then someone pulls you around underground like by the legs. And I was like, oh, that's like learning where that came from, where little nods like that came from, was such a great journey to go on with these games in general. And something like Puppet Combo that is very VHS, that is very PS1 inspired as well. Like, it's just, you get all the references, don't you? Sometimes you'll see something and go, oh my god, I thought that was original over here. It wasn't. It's a nice little bit of pastiche.
You're totally spot on. I love it when you just kind of notice those threads like we were talking earlier. I think for me, being in that room in Alone in the Dark when the camera switches, I love that there's a sense of humor in the acknowledgement that things have changed, but even in the comments by the characters, like, to complete one of the puzzles, you have to go back into a room that is almost hidden, but not quite, between the transition between these two spaces. So you walk in, the camera shifts, your character's on the other side, but there's a room in between there. So just using that perspective to hide little puzzles and to kind of mess with the player directly, as well as the characters in the space. It's like, I've seen that adopted so many times since, so it's great to see Alone in the Dark completely change its subgenre, but still pay attention and pay a kind of respect to why that style of horror was so impactful and embraced, and is still embraced now to begin with.
For sure. Like, it's the found footage thing, like literally, like when you're attached to someone's head, even when you're in the moment going first person, you don't get the full view, do you?
No.
You'd like, there's always something that could be in the periphery. It's that lack of control. 100%.
It did make me laugh when she went into that little room and she like reveals the mirror and she says, oh, why didn't I see this here? And I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Because at first I literally said out loud, because we didn't go in that room. And then I was like, oh, I get it. That's the joke. But it did make me laugh. I get the sense of humour going back to it and stuff. That I did enjoy that.
100%.
I think it's kind of it's there's elements of humor all the way through the game, but that scene in particular, just going into the closet, into this other realm, and it's one of the first times that the characters are properly interacted in a significant way after they get separated and kind of go on their different paths throughout the building. So when one of them has seen all of these monsters and one of them kind of hasn't and is focused more on the human drama, they're just kind of like, okay, they're going into the closet now. They're going into another realm, I suppose. I'm just going to let them do whatever they need to do because I've got a murder to solve.
Yeah, I really liked it from Emily's perspective. I feel like the story gives you a lot more because of her relationship to the characters in it, and how the detective's like, oh, I'm just a gruff detective, I don't care. And then when you do it from Edward's side and he's like, no, there's things going on, and Emily's like, pull yourself together. Like, I'm trying to help my uncle. Like, I really liked kind of the similarities, but also just had the slight different relationship between the two of them that was very true to their characters. And I think that's kind of a testament to David Harbour and Jodie Comer as well, who are excellent and put a lot into their characters. I know Jodie Comer in particular spoke about the throwback, the flashback memory being something that she helped write as well. Like, she kind of put herself into creating that character and the sort of story that would have affected her.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. But that's, for me, I played that character the second time around, and to me that was like the key scene. That was so well shot, so well framed. It was so dark. It was so it was one of the few times I think that a real grisly imagery is even used in the game. You get that massacre right at the very end, but until then it's more surreal, and there are blood and guts, but you don't really get that sort of intense focus on the grime and the decay and like the dead bodies that are surrounding you. So to have that imagery, the suddenness of that violent imagery, juxtaposed with that dark story, I thought, wow.
Straight away, it's like Amnesia the Bunker. When you went in there, I was like, oh, I love this. And a little man beast going round. I was like, Amnesia the Bunker, let's go.
I'm so pleased you've given me an excuse to talk about Amnesia the Bunker, because that's exactly what I thought about as well. I was like, I am back in the trenches, literally, and I'm having a great time avoiding this freaky monster while shells rain down on me and I'm surrounded by these dead bodies.
Oh, have you played Amnesia the Bunker?
I haven't. It's
oh my
on
God,
my list.
this is great because this is a great excuse for you to play. Honestly, it's incredible.
I will say that was my favourite bit as well, going around the barracks and things.
I
have like this really weird love for like Nazi horror. So like anything that's like war-based, like films like Overlord, anything like that, where it sort of mixes, sort of real history with supernatural, creepy stuff.
Yeah.
I'm down for that. So I had excitement, but for a different reason. When I was in the barracks running around.
The horrors of war are so real, and like being able to play into that with actual horror and with creatures, mixing actual traumatic nastiness with that actually happened to loads of people with like, here's a supernatural element that kind of embodies the grief and the horror, and also it's got big horns. Like,
I think it's because I love sad horror as well. Like I always say to people, my favourite subgenre is like sad, depressing horror. Anything that can sort of scare me and make me cry. Things like The Haunting of Hill House, where it's like a scare a minute, a sob a minute. Like, I love stuff like that. So that whole segment for me, like, started off being scared, running around, and then by the end of it I actually like felt really sad for her. And that was definitely my favourite part.
For sure. I think Hill House is a great like reference point as well. Thinking of like a haunted mansion that is like, because Mike Flanagan built it so there was ghosts in every shot, didn't he? And there was so many that you could go and find and look for. And that's kind of the vibe of Alone in the Dark, and not knowing where these creatures are going to come from. There's a whole area where you walk, the first one, in the 1992 one, there's a whole area you go into that's got all ghouls sitting at a table, and it's like, which one's going to get up? I don't know. And with the new game as well, it's all these creatures, these abominations just coming, materializing, being spotted in the distance when it's at the oil rig and you look out across the lake and you see them all writhing.
I did think a lot about, I think about The Haunting of Hill House a lot because it's my all-time favourite, but it did sort of give me that same kind of vibe where, you mix in, again, the supernatural with the sort of mental health and, is it real, is it not? And then Hill House as well, I don't want to like spoil it for anyone, but there's also rooms that are like one thing for one person and another thing for another person. And I think that sort of thing is really prevalent in Alone in the Dark, where you'll go in the one room 1 minute and it's one thing, and then you'll go out and you go back in and it's another thing. And I just love that. I thought it was really cool.
That like cross section of mind over matter. It's like, am I in Jeremy's mind, or is this actually where I am? It's just done so well. And I'm going to end us on this kind of question for this section anyway. But what do you think the challenges of a horror reboot like this are, where there's such a legacy to live up to? Because I feel like Alone in the Dark 2024 has handled it really well, where it's got all these references and these throwbacks that aren't too granular that you're like, what does this mean? You know what I mean? Like even with the fixed camera moment where you're looking down, like you instantly know there's kind of that gaming literature of like, oh, I know that this is a reference to something. I know that I'm having a little time in the old game sort of thing. But what do you think the challenges of that are, and how do you think it's been addressed in the new game?
I think it's really tough, especially now, because when you're always dealing with a franchise like Alone in the Dark, which was, seen by many as the start of something, inevitably you're going to spawn things that maybe for a period become more popular or dominate the zeitgeist in a bigger way, to the point where people then associate those mechanics or those ideas with other titles that aren't yours. So when you kind of circle back round, you're not just trying to pay homage to your franchise, but acknowledge the effect that it's had on gaming in general. So I think it's difficult coming into a title like this because the comparisons are something like Resident Evil 2, which really successfully rebooted the original Resident Evil 2 of the same name, and managed to adapt those fixed camera angles and those classic mechanics into a over-the-shoulder third-person shooter. With Alone in the Dark, you kind of have to, I think, battle the idea of what modern horror even is, and kind of stay true to the franchise and the things that made it so pioneering back in the day, but try to implement them in a way that still feels fresh and doesn't just feel like the things that it inspired. And I think this really manages to do that by staying true to some elements that maybe some of the developers or writers might have actually discarded entirely from the story, like setting it in the 1930s, really dedicating yourself to this period aesthetic. We talked about like the wartime scene there. Like in interviews, the writers were talking about how much attention they paid to the detail of the period, and you kind of get that in the location, and that sort of sense of place, I think, really allows Alone in the Dark to separate itself from a bunch of other horror games that followed it in a way, while still maintaining that mechanical familiarity that people expect from a modern horror game.
I think that the setting completely changed is massive testament to that, like going from kind of this New England Lovecraftian classic setting to the bayou, the swamp, and kind of playing into that as well is a really clever way of slightly manipulating it so that it can be a little more loosey-goosey with the specifics of it too. I think the main problem that I always think about when rebooting a franchise, and this I saw with Dead Space, the latest remake of the original one, is you're figuring out how to scare an audience who already know what's going to happen. They know the story, they know the scares, they're so familiar with it, especially something with such an iconic legacy. That how do you approach this? Keep the heart of it, keep some semblance of a narrative, but also restructure it in a way that's scary still. And Dead Space did this by adding in new jump scares and changing up the formulation of puzzles so that people didn't know when necromorphs were going to jump out. And I feel like Alone in the Dark 2024 has done this by pulling at the threads of Jeremy a lot and kind of stretching him out and building him into a new character. He's not dead in this one.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it. Or is he? Because when you go in the loft, there's still a noose in the loft. You know what I mean? It's that kind of toying with expectations, audience knowledge, and still making it accessible to new players is so hard. And I do feel like 2024 absolutely dives in there and gives us everything we want as returning fans, but also as new people to the franchise. That there is all those nods there that just let you in a bit as well.
Yeah. I love remakes or reimaginings that are kind of a play on the original rather than just a straight up adaptation. And this definitely signifies that right at the beginning, like you said, when Jeremy's not dead this time around, or at least there is a physical embodiment of Jeremy here. And oh, look, the house is not empty, it's full of people, all with their motivations. So I think right from the get-go, if you even have a little bit of knowledge about the story of the original, you know that something is a little bit off course. Honestly, in that way, it kind of reminds me of the Final Fantasy VII remake, where it's similar, but it's not quite the same, and it's telling a new story within that framework and kind of toying with your own knowledge and subverting it in many ways, kind of like the Resident Evil 4 remake does as well, where in that game, if you try to abuse, say, certain areas that were safe or you could cheese enemies with in the original, the game will go, we know all about that. We literally wrote the book on that stuff and we're going to subvert your expectations. And then this game does it with its story and with its setting by constantly reframing things that you might have taken for granted or that you expected, and then delivering something a little bit new.
I feel like walking past a window, I kept expecting something to smash through and be like, meh. A direct Resident Evil influence also. We have to say it because of the dogs that come through the windows. But in that first scene, literally where something flies through the window and it is just horrible and there and smashes everything. Every time you walk around the latest game, I'm always like, oh God, is something going to pop out? But yeah, I just think it's handled it really, really well. And I think as from a news perspective, that's a really interesting way to come at it as well, Liz. So
yeah, I mean, I think you're always going to have challenges when you're remaking anything. I know that within the horror like film community, remakes, you know, there's something that always bring up quite a big discourse because, you know, people who, for example, people who were born in the 70s and saw, you know, all the 70s and 80s horrors on release, they don't want any of them to be remade because the original's the best one and nothing you can do could ever beat it or be better or blah, blah, blah. But then obviously for people who, like me, are like a little bit younger or like newer to the genre or newer to the game and things, I understand that people who played the one in 92 will probably have such fond memories of it and that they will, you know, there'll be some of them that will be like, I want that game and that game only.
yeah. Josh wants to be 11 running through the house.
And I get that in the same way that, you know, there are certain films and certain games that I wouldn't want anyone to touch because they are so special and they are so important. But also remakes bring in new people to go back and check out the old ones. If this new game hadn't been released, there's a good chance that I probably would have never thought to go back and revisit the older ones. I will now because I've played this one and I've enjoyed it, and I want to be able to, you know, engage in these kind of conversations about the previous ones and their influences. I've enjoyed everything that they've influenced, so it sort of puts me in that position to learn about the history of it, whereas I might not had it never been remade.
Yeah.
So I think as long as it's done well, like you say it is, I think I'm all for remakes too.
It's a cool blend of new and old, isn't it? Like you said there, Liz, like it really gets you into the world of Alone in the Dark through all of these references that you might not even know about until you start Googling afterwards, and then you start, you know, doing your conspiracy board of connections. But I think just by keeping some of the elements of the old story and certainly some of the aesthetic cues of the old story, but by bringing it up to date with more modern horror conventions. I mean, the focus on mental health in general is like, that's huge, especially in the film world at this moment in time. You know, you've got your elevated horror, which I don't necessarily love that term, but you know, you've got all of those movies that, you know, dwell on the monster story being a manifestation of grief or mental trauma or illness or health or whatever it is. So to focus more on that psychological aspect in this new game while still keeping an element of camp and humor and fun, kind of, I think it was a tight line to walk. I wouldn't have liked to have been doing it myself because it's a tough thing to adapt, but I think that manages to make it both new and old.
And it is so camp. It is. I love how camp it is. Yeah. Like that the uncle walking around being like, oh hell. Like I love his energy, how he's just like, something's afoot here. And has a little drink. And like that your healing process is having a drink as well. I thought that was quite funny. Like as in like it's a little nod to the kind of twisted way that it would work back in the day of being a hard-boiled detective, having a swig from your little stash.
Yeah, it felt very like sort of Clue, or like it felt all like very like that, like a sort of in some moments like a whodunit, especially because you meet such a large cast of characters. And I loved the woman that kept like offering her a drink and sort of being like, oh, here you are again, and like she came across very flirty.
Yeah, I was like, kiss.
And I thought that was like, that added like quite a camp sort of cuteness to it, especially when you've just gone through something horrific and then you walk in the room and you're like, oh, okay, but I'll have a gin fizz and everything will be fine. It's like, okay.
Oh, for sure. Like going into the kitchen and the cook being like, I'm making gumbo, get out as well. I was like, oh, okay, sorry, because Edward totally gets it in the neck. You play as Emily and she's like, oh yeah, it's a nice meal I made. But yeah, I think those touches of humour really make it stand out. There's always a wonderful thin line between fear and laughter, which is the reactive sort of moment that comes with comedy and horror, which is very important. And I feel like veering into the funny is the way, yes, of lessening the tension so the scares become stronger, but also there is that kind of special moment where something is both funny and it makes and scary, and it makes it that much more of both. It's like a clown. When you see a clown and you're like, oh yeah, funny guy, hey? And then you think, oh my God, horrible murderers, nastiness, all the like Pennywise, and and it kind of plays to both things at the same time. Like, Pennywise probably is the best example of that, where he's doing a little dance and it's really scary, but also he's just a guy doing a little dance, having a little jig. I feel like Alone in the Dark is that. It's the Dark Man doing a little jig.
Yeah. I mean, the Dark Man himself and the visual of him, the Egyptian pharaoh design.
Yeah.
I like that. At least in part, the explanation for that is it's something Jeremy saw when he was little and he was going to this show, and it is kind of like theatrical in a way. It reminded me a lot of how the Babadook evoked horror out of something that could have been a little bit silly. In that movie, it's a children's storybook that's brought to life. You have these admittedly quite terrifying illustrations of the Babadook before you see him, but I thought this worked in a similar way where the Dark Man's appearance is startling because it might not be what you expect it to be, but it's more powerful because it's so associated with one of the characters and what they have experienced before and what they find scary. And I often find that specificity of what someone else finds scary really interesting, because it might be something you haven't thought about, and then you leave the game or the movie or whatever it is going, oh no, new fear unlocked. Oh, why did they do that to me? Yeah, pharaohs. And who would have thought it?
Oh God. I think that there's loads to talk about with the Dark Man, particularly in our Lovecraft episode, which will be episode 2, which is coming up after this one.
Wow.
In order, see? It goes 1, 2, and then 3. So that's very nice to see. But I'm going to finish up our section here so we can move on to the quiz. Okay, guys, I hope you're ready to go head to head in my quiz.
Yeah, really
Just
excited.
casually nutty.
Oh, that's all I've got as the intro. My quiz.
Come on, give it a name, Ash.
The Derceto quiz.
Amazing.
The Ash quiz.
On brand. Great.
the quiz man. The evil tree quiz.
Yeah, that's the one.
The quiz. So it's only 3 questions, so don't worry, it's not too scary. And you've got to shout your name when you want to answer.
Okay.
So yours is Liz and yours is Josh.
Is it?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, just to clear that up.
Amazing.
So the first question. These are designed to give trivia more than anything. So I'm not expecting you to know it straight away. If you do, well done. But I just wanted to talk about some of the trivia in the game as well. So 2 horror directors inspired Frederick Reynolds' design of Alone in the Dark 1992, each famous for a subgenre of horror. But can you guess their name from these anagrams?
Oh. I was gonna shout Liz, but
You have a go before the anagram.
is Guillermo del Toro in one of them?
No.
Okay,
No.
I might be thinking of something else related to this game though.
Well, I guess you need an anagram. So the first one is aorta redoing, and the second one is merge ogre roo. Sorry.
I wish you had these written
I was
down
gonna say,
somewhere.
I feel like I need a screen with them on.
Those confuse me more than having no anagrams. I think.
Aorta redoing and merge ogre roo.
What's the first one again?
Aorta redoing
Ooh,
and merge ogre roo. I can give you the subgenres as well if you're
yeah,
really
give me the
struggling.
subgenres.
So I would say one is aorta redoing. I would say very associated with the giallo genre, and I would say merge ogre roo is a zombie guy.
George Romero.
That's not your name,
Liz.
Yeah,
George Romero.
yeah, that's one. That is the zombie guy.
Do I get half a point?
Merge ogre roo.
Yeah, let's can we team up on this one? I think
can,
I've got
yeah.
the second one. All right, Josh.
Yeah.
Is it Dario Argento?
It is, yeah, it is. Well
yes.
done, gang. You did it together.
it.
Well done.
So Dario Argento and George Romero were the 2 horror directors that inspired Frederick Reynolds, which I think is a really nice little kind of, I think it shows the style of the game a lot. If you think about Dario Argento, if you think about Suspiria, and then that kind of vibe in Alone in the Dark 1992, you can see the colours, you can see the kind of creepy sense of dread. The soundtrack playing such a big part of it as well, the Goblin soundtrack in Suspiria, and then these strings and pianos, and how that has followed through into Alone in the Dark 2024 with the doom jazz.
Yes.
Like the music has been such a thread. But I just thought that was a fun fact.
It is.
Yeah.
It is a fun fact.
And now the next question.
Okay.
There's an urban legend that says Alone in the Dark was based on a true story. A man named Edward Carnby stayed overnight in a mansion to prove it wasn't haunted. A witness who saw him at a payphone the next day said he looked like he'd been fighting what all night? And this is multiple choice. So, first up, he looked like he'd been fighting gators all night. He looked like he'd been fighting demon chickens all night. He looked like he'd been fighting ghouls all night.
Josh.
Yeah?
Ghouls,
Wrong,
surely.
wrong.
No, come on.
Liz.
Yeah.
Oh, was it A?
That's not an
Gators.
answer. I don't being so hard on you. I'm like, say it. It is gators. Yeah. I just thought I'd be able to fool you with the ghouls.
Oh, you did?
I think I just thought gators because I was thinking of like swamplands and
Yeah, for sure.
things like that.
It's definitely. I feel like that's a good little swampy link to the new film as new game as well. But demon chickens is the actual name for things that fly through the window. Apparently,
Is it?
that's what people call them
interesting.
anyway. That's what people
Okay.
call them. I don't know.
Chickens are pretty scary.
Yeah, I feel like when they're skinless, like featherless as well, they're so rank.
New fear unlocked. About that till right now.
I'm
Naked
just
chicken.
Yeah,
Ooh.
imagining it just flying towards you.
Yeah.
Great.
Where you
Oh.
can experience that for yourself in Alone in the Dark 1992. But yeah, there was this whole urban legend that said Alone in the Dark literally was a true story, and there was a man called Edward Carnby, and he stayed overnight in the mansion and got so spooked that he looked like he'd been fighting an alligator, which is just a really great description as well.
That is perfect,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just imagine
Love
someone being,
that.
he looked like he'd been fighting gators all night. Like, that's how I imagine it as well. Whether that's true or not is nowhere confirmed. So our last question, based on that answer, Edward Carnby gives himself a nickname in the opening of Alone in the Dark 1992 that is never spoken of again anywhere else in the series. What animal group does he call himself? And this is multiple choice. So the lizard, the reptile, or the dragon?
Josh,
Yeah.
is it the reptile?
It is the reptile!
I remember seeing this in the opening text and thinking, excuse me, Edward.
Can you expand?
Yeah. That if we get a sequel to Alone in the Dark 2024, I want the origins of that investigated.
I really want to know why he's the reptile. It's just like that. That opening monologue pops me so much every time because his voice, like, I feel like David Harbour does an amazing job of recapturing that Edward Carnby from the original game. But like, just that my friends call me Edward. Everyone else calls me the reptile. Okay, Edward. All right.
It's because he's been fighting gators all night.
Yeah, and then he's like, and my banker calls me all the time because I'm in debt, baby. Okay. Great opening.
Too much, Edward, too much.
It's
You're
like
revealing
Emily
too much.
Hartwood's just like, I'm going to go and see my uncle. And Edward's there like, I've got pages to tell you.
Imagine going for a drink with him. He'd
Yeah.
chat your ear
yeah.
off all night, wouldn't he?
The reptile at it again. But right, that is the end of our first episode of the Derceto Files, aka the Ash Files, which was all about Alone in the Dark and its legacy in horror and survival horror in particular. Now you can catch our next episodes, which will be on Lovecraftian horror as well as Southern Gothic horror, which is episode 2 and episode 3 respectively, very, very soon. So do come back and look for those. But in the meantime, where can we catch you on socials, guys?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it, at kill_Liz,
I love this.
LIZT.
I love your username, KillLizd.
Yeah.
KillLizd.
I annoyingly don't have a imaginative one like Ash's or Liz's. You can find me on social medias if you want. It's Josh Brown, but it's got an extra O, so it sounds like Brune.
That's exciting.
It's clean, innit?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Facebook, the Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine isn't exciting at all. It's just Ash Millman with no extra anything.
Yeah, but your like titles are always good, aren't they? Like /Killman or
Yeah.
Mrs.
Yeah, that's
Thrillman
great.
or
Oh
something.
no, it's pun time, baby. Let it go. But that's where you can find us if you want to hear some more horror chatting in the meantime, as we're all big horror fans and excited to get back and talk to you about some more Alone in the Dark goodness. So we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.